Hello again. So this talk will be about hearing protection. Actually, hearing protection, not hearing protectors. So that will be very different from what we've seen so far. And the research question is, well, there is definitely a difference in the auditory senses between the two individuals that you see on screen. And is there any way we could actually have that younger kid keep his hearing for a while? So the question is really, can we preserve that very fine sense that we all enjoy? So here's a little bit how the conversation will go. We'll discuss a little bit the motivation, and then I'll show you a couple concepts. So one is called the age of your ear, so A. Some hardware and software, so just Odile showed you a couple nice tools. We have as well some embedded platforms. And then we'll discuss those results, the platform being named Interact Sound, and comes with this web interface. So let's start just by setting obviously things that is that hearing loss is on the rise, and not just in the particular case of your hearing perceptionist you was mentioning, but really if you look worldwide, this is really an epidemic that we are facing, and this really deals with all countries and for various reasons or various conditions. It's obviously not the same across the planet, but still hearing loss is on the rise. And if you look at one individual life cycle, you acknowledge obviously that we will be facing a presbycusis, so the fact that we lose hearing as we age. But there is also something which is really new, I would say, in human history, which is really this occupational noise-induced hearing loss. And worse than that, and maybe even more recent in our history, is this recreational noise-induced hearing loss. So the fact that we are exposed now at a younger and younger age to some noise coming from our nightlife, from our social activities, and even from music and personal music players. So I won't go into all the material you can find on, for example, the exposure through personal media players. I think, and I revisited those references recently, this is really something that was very proponent a couple of years ago. I think now there have been good efforts from manufacturers to try to have safe hearing devices, so I acknowledge that. Nevertheless, the recreational exposure is very present. So I'm part, as several of you here, of this Make Listening Safe effort at the World Health Organization, and clearly we have a lot of data that supports the fact that yes, our teenagers, our younger generation are being exposed to a lot of recreational noises. And while we can develop indeed smart platforms, smart hardware, hearing safe devices, I'm a big believer in education. And I think that raising awareness, is one way to go. And I'm obviously not the only one. And many people did an amazing job. And you may recognize several programs or awareness raising campaigns. And ours is not different, except that we bring some toys in the story. So the toy that we are bringing is a platform that we called Interact Sound. So son is the French name for sound. And so here you recognize an ATF. That's my only connection with the session here. It's, thank you, Bill, for having me here. We are happy to have the latest BNK, but clearly this is simply a set of let's say earphones, and this box with some digital signal processing embedded. And here we were running some calibration of that headset, and I'm gonna show you a little bit what's in that box and that headset. So. Let's describe those tools that we developed. And here, Odile, I'm opening that box for you. What we have inside is actually something that you know very well because we got inspired by the Timpan. So this is a TNC microcontroller and some codec analog to digital converters. Except that we were able to make them work on 4 input channels. So we have both external microphones and internal microphones. But here I'll be only speaking for the fact that we have external microphone that will pick up the ambient sound and that will be able to play them back inside the earpiece with any sort of processing that we want. So the processing is actually described in this block diagram, and I will just go step by step so that you can really follow the ideas we had. So the first idea is to have simply a pass-through system. So it's very basic, external microphone, play back directly inside the ear. We just have to obviously make sure that we have a unity gain, so 0 dB insertion loss. It's really transparent hearing, so calibration is required for that. But then we are able to have as well an embedded music player. So we would be able to have the user pick up some pre-selected music files. And those music files of which we know the equivalent levels. And the people can enjoy those music and will be actually asked to listen at their comfortable level to that musical piece. And while they are doing this, we will actually record their exposure, music-induced exposure, using obviously the LEQ measurement during the duration of their playback, but calculating the age of your ears, so A. So for those of you who did not attend ASA meeting a couple years back, that's an idea that is actually not very new. If you're familiar with the ISO 1999 standard, you may remember Dan Johnson's work. And he was actually the one that came up with the idea that, well, rather than expressing exposure in terms of LEQ, LEQ doesn't speak much for a teenager. If you're telling them, well, this is 88 dBA equivalent, for 8 hours, that doesn't ring a bell. If you tell them, well, you just received a dose of 120%, doesn't ring a bell either. I mean, it's not bleeding, it's not hurting, so what are you talking about? But if you raise the age argument, then it becomes something. I had kids that at that time, were thinking that they were 16 years old. And when you were referring to somebody that was, reaching 25, that was like, wow, very close to the grave. They are almost dead. This is like the end of it. So I thought, well, maybe we could use that argument to maybe, raise some awareness there. So the idea was really to simply express their exposure level in terms of accelerated aging of their ear and their hearing level, hearing thresholds. So for that, you can obviously just read through the ISO 99 standard, and you can see how autologically normal person will be aging just as a function of their age, which is the Y variable here. And if you go into the lookup tables and get those alpha factors, you'll get different values for males and females. And here we decided to take the most sensitive frequency, which is 8 kilohertz, that we lose high frequency before the rest. So this is what you've seen in that dB per year regression line. So that's the value we use to predict or to have the age-related hearing. And on the other side, we have the noise-induced threshold shift that are N zeros. And here that's a little bit more complicated, but you can see that the equation relates obviously to the exposure level and then to some age and the duration expressed in years of your exposure to those levels. So here we have as well to use some regression coefficients that are frequency dependent, and we took the 3 kilohertz third octave band, and you know that this is where the notch, which is the noise-induced noise-induced hearing loss, happens the most rapidly. And we basically equals the two terms, so age on one side and exposure on the other. And we do have to solve basically a set of equations. That is that aging term has to relate to the noise-induced term. And there are actually 3 solutions to that regression. And the first one is that really your ear may not be aging faster, and that's good news, and that's usually because your exposure is too low, or because that didn't happen for enough time. So this is the first case that you may have, which is very favorable. The other case is that really your ear will be aging faster. That's because your exposure is excessive and the duration, in terms of years, has been long enough. And in between those two cases, there are interpolations that have been proposed by the ISO standard that we feature as well. So when you put all those equations together, you end up basically with a regression line. So again, if I was to plot your real physical age on the horizontal axis, so the x-axis, and the age of your ear on the y-axis, obviously, if your ears were to age at the same pace of your body, that's a pure regression line. Now, if you are being exposed to excessive noise levels, and here I'm really presenting, the one extreme that you see is a 100 dBA exposure level, 8 hours equivalent for 40 hours a week for some time. What you do get is that you do age much quicker, and your ears are reaching an older age much quicker than anything. So let's say that you were 18 when you started listening to music. You just turned 30, and what happens is that your hearing is at the level of somebody over 70 years old. So those figures actually were a little bit more, striking and understandable for people to understand, because we could obviously predict how, fast they would be aging. But what would be really cool is to make them listen to that. So that's the next step. So remember, we computed the accelerated aging. And what we'll do in our box is that we'll do actually present some hearing loss. So there is one way that you can actually mimic what will be happening to their ears in some years from now on. And for that, we take as well the ISO 1999 standard profiles for age-induced hearing loss. And so we program those filters that are basically rolling off all those high frequencies. And we leave the users experiencing this, their accelerated aging of the ear. So all this is actually software driven. We have a phone app, which is actually just looking at a micro website, which is run by this microcontroller. And the user can be engaging, after they have been evaluated for their accelerated aging. They can play a little bit with the hearing loss and experience what it is. So there is even an extra step that we added. We are a little bit nasty. We added a tinnitus generator. So just to tell them, well, this is something that can happen as well, is that if it's too loud, for a certain moment, you may experience this. And so that's exactly the experience they can have. And the beauty is that they can have this on site being seated, but they can as well play with it and travel and start discussing, engaging with people, and really feel what it is to have a hearing loss, which is actually related to their health practices. So here are a little bit the results that we got. So I mentioned this is a software-driven interface. So that's a web app that is being, that's mostly 9 screens. The first one will be the onboarding. They will have to give us their age, their sex at birth, and the number of hours they have been listening to their music to start with. And then they'll be presented, for example, with some playback music, a list, so they can sort through a list of artists, and we change the list depending a little bit on the public. And from the music level that they're using, we estimate the aging of their ear. So here's one screenshot. I'll just magnify that for you. Here, this is a subject that was 20 years old. And because of the trend, the fact that that person was listening to a high level, that was actually a 93 dBA exposure, we estimated that the ears would be probably 24 years old today. But if the trend continues, when this person will turn 25, the ears will be now 32. So you see that this is accelerated aging. You saw the regression line. So the idea is that now we play back the music and the ambient sound with those accelerated aging curves, and the person can really understand toggling between the future of their ears and their current ears, and really understanding what the impact of hearing loss might be on their life. So at the end of because that's a research project approved by our ethical committee, at the end we were offering the participants to fill a little survey so that we could have some feedback on this experiment. And that experiment was actually run 2 days ago. So you really get the latest and the greatest. We did that during the Journée Nationale de l'Audition du Québec. And we were at the Science Center in the Old Port in Montreal on Saturday. And you can see here, that was a bright day outside, but still we were super happy to be there because there was a lot of interest in our design, our application. You could see 2 people. The 2 male on the left are the 2 audiologists and engineer from my team, and having here a test subject being using the platform. And what I found really personally super intriguing was when we were dealing with the kids. So here's a little boy, and he was 9 years old, and his mother on the right, with the pink jacket, is actually an audiologist. And at the end of the day, or at the end of the experience, the little boy realized and told to his mother, wow, this is how grandpa, is hearing things, because they could actually play with the age as well. And he suddenly realized that, this is why his grandpa was sometimes having difficulties understanding and so on. So that I found really, very nice to see. And well, I think this image did not come up, but that's a little girl that was actually having an older sister that was hearing impaired and was wearing a hearing aid. But sometimes she forgot to wear their hearing aids. And on that day, on Saturday, she didn't have her hearing aids. And the little sister would make fun out of the older sister, saying, you don't understand, nagging. And actually, now having that hearing loss, she realized what it was and how impairing that was. So I thought there were two great experiments, and you can see us at the end of the day super happy with this, the outcomes of that pre-test, let's say. So just to conclude, I think we came up with a very simple and easy to understand concept. We are certainly not the first, but the fact that this is really an immersive experience where the people can really feel for what it is, not just an online YouTube video with hearing loss simulators and so on, I think makes a difference. The fact that they can really engage and have real-time interaction with their surrounding people, siblings, and so on was a powerful, I think, motivator. The tinnitus experience was something that was intriguing because some people never heard of that word. They didn't know, but they say, "Oh yeah, I recognize this is something that I have after concert," and so on. We say, "Well, let me tell you, this is not necessarily a good sign." And so you can, educate and do some stabilization. And we were super happy to see that a lot of people coming from trades and training for professional training and so on, came asking if the product, was available. And because they say, well, that could be a great motivator to, explain for people why it's important to wear hearing protectors and why we teach you how to fit, an earplug and so on. So something that could be, implemented in various declinations. So I can see that really happening for kids, for young adults and the like. And finally, we were even approached by the museum, the Science Museum. They said, well, we want to have a permanent, exhibition here where you have that type of device. So here I'm looking, I don't know if this is your TimTac or some device, but I'm looking for maybe an earmuff now that could be, featuring those outer ear microphones and some earmuffs so that we can play with this. Because in the meantime, we are still working on making the hardware way shorter. And this is a similar platform, but much shorter with a different microcontroller and the DSP that you may recognize. So we are open for collaboration, and that's my contact information.